Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the kind of place your brain probably told you not to. You know that uneasy thrill when you watch a dark hallway and swear something's moving in there. Yeah, this one's going to be worse. But don't worry, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand before a fortress that looks more like a scar on the land than a building. The moon spills its thin, silver light across walls blackened with age, and the air smells faintly of wet stone and something metallic. The stories said this was where the unwanted truths of the Middle Ages were buried alive, sometimes literally. You walk closer. Your boots sink into damp moss, the kind that clings to everything here. You notice how the silence feels too heavy, as if even the crickets have decided this patch of ground belongs to someone else. The gates rise in front of you, massive iron lattice bent with rust. They squeal open with a groan, so deep it sounds like a sigh from the earth itself. Inside, your lantern's light dances across archways, shaped like open jaws. Every stone looks hand-carved by someone who hated whoever was meant to live or die. Behind them, medieval builders knew how to make prisons feel eternal. There's an old saying from 14th century England, a man may forget his sins, but the walls never do. Scholars still argue whether it referred to actual penitence or the invention of the keep, a fortified tower meant to isolate the worst offenders. Whatever the origin, the meaning fits too well here. As you move further inside, you feel the floor tilt slightly downward. The castle's heart beats below ground. Dungeons weren't built for escape. They were built for disappearance. One step and history shuts its mouth behind you. The torchlight flickers, catching on the remains of wooden beams and the faint outline of what might have been a gatekeeper's bench. A place where someone once sat, counting prisoners instead of sheep. The thought makes you smile grimly. Everyone needs a bedtime routine, right? You pass through a corridor so narrow your shoulders brush the walls. The stones are slick. You trace your fingers along the grooves where iron bars once rested. They've been gone for centuries, but you swear you feel a hum of memory through the cold surface. Like the stone remembers how it used to tremble from screams. Somewhere behind you, water drips. You don't look back. The medieval world didn't invent cruelty, but it gave it an architectural upgrade. A dungeon wasn't just punishment, it was theater. A dark reminder to anyone thinking of disobedience that pain was the loudest language power could speak. The guards would march prisoners through the courtyard in daylight, so everyone could watch them vanish into the black stairwell you're now descending. Step by step, you follow them. Centuries too late. Yet somehow on time, the air grows colder, heavier, your breath fogs in front of you. You notice the faint scratch marks on the wall, uneven, frantic. Some long ago soul had tried to count the days. Maybe they ran out of stone before they ran out of hope. A rat scurries across your boot. You flinch, then laugh quietly at yourself. You think about how in medieval London, rats were more loyal companions than guards. At least they never left their prisoners. It's an odd fact historians love the same species that carried the Black Death also kept captives warm in their sleep. Symbiosis. Medieval edition. You reach a heavy oak door. It's swollen with moisture, warped by time but still somehow intact. The keyhole looks large enough to swallow a coin. You lean in, and a faint gust escapes from the gap, cold, dry, and sour. It smells like dust and rusted iron. You push. The hinges scream, and you step into the dark. For a moment, your mind paints faces on the walls, distorted shapes of despair and memory. The lantern trembles in your hand, casting shadows that move even when you stand still. You tell yourself it's just the flicker, but there's something too deliberate about the way the dark folds itself here. Imagine, you whisper, how quiet it must have been between screams. And there's your first chill. Every medieval prison had its own name, its own reputation. Some were run by kings, some by bishops, and some by whoever had the most knives. The Tower of London, the Chair Tellet in Paris, and Nuremberg's Lochjef Engnis. All of them had one thing in common: they believed pain could purify the soul. Scholars still argue whether this belief came from theology or sheer sadism. Either way, it worked. People confessed to crimes they'd never heard of. The dungeon became a confession booth, where the priest was iron itself. You kneel and run your hand across the floor. It's uneven, not because of time, but because people knelt here too long, too often. Stone reshaped by suffering. You think of that and swallow hard. There's a sound, a chain rattling far off, or maybe just a trick of your imagination. You decide to believe it's the latter, because that's the kind of lie you need right now. The lantern light catches something small, a fragment of parchment sealed under centuries of grime. You brush it gently. Faded words peek through, miserere mei Deus. Have mercy on me, O God. You whisper it back to the walls. For a second the dungeon almost exhales, as if remembering someone who once said the same words with more desperation. The moment passes. The air settles again into silence. You look around one last time. The gate behind you stands open, a sliver of pale moonlight cutting across the floor. You realize how much you want to step back through it, but you also know you won't, not yet. Because this was only the gate. The real darkness waits deeper in, and now that you've started down this path, you can't stop at the whisper. You have to listen to what it's saying. You descend further into the fortress, the echo of your own footsteps overlapping until it sounds like a small army following behind you. The air thickens, damp and heavy, the scent of old iron mingling with mold, and the faint sweetness of decay. You don't see anyone, but you can feel the ghosts of people who never left. Like the air itself is woven with their breath. Your lantern trembles as a draft sighs through the corridor. You pass under a crumbling arch where the ceiling dips so low you have to duck. Water drips rhythmically from somewhere above, each drop landing with a sharp tap that feels uncomfortably like the ticking of a clock. Except time doesn't tick down here. It stretches and bends and forgets you exist. Then you see them, the chains. They hang from the wall in uneven rows, each one looped through iron rings bolted deep into the stone. Their rust is so thick it looks like dried blood. Some still hold fragments of leather cuffs, blackened and stiff. You reach out and touch one, and it moves just enough to jingle softly, a sound that once meant someone was still alive. Medieval chains were personal things, almost tailored like clothing. Some were made for wrists, some for necks, and others, disturbingly, for entire bodies. In the 13th century, smiths would measure a prisoner's limbs before forging the iron, as if fitting them for their final outfit. Scholars still argue whether this practice was for efficiency or humiliation, but either way, it tells you everything about what mercy looked like back then. You imagine being dragged down these stairs centuries ago, barefoot, blindfolded, your heartbeat the only drum in the darkness. A torchlight above, a hooded guard below. You'd hear that same clink, that soft metallic whisper of inevitability, the chains waiting for you like open arms. You can almost hear it now, the clang of metal closing around bone, the muffled protests swallowed by stone. The air seems to hum with echoes, faint and layered, as if the walls have recorded everything. You step closer and realize there are deep scratches near one of the rings, scrapes that don't look random. They're letters. The grime away and make out even marks, ALIB, maybe the start of Libertas, Latin for freedom, maybe just someone's initials. Either way, you feel a strange guilt touching it, like you're intruding on a prayer. There's a small alcove to your left, barely large enough to stand in. Inside sits a bucket, cracked and splintered, half buried in dust. You stare at it and remember an uncomfortable truth: medieval sanitation was less about hygiene and more about survival. People chained to walls often lived among their own waste. The lucky ones died quickly, the unlucky became part of the ecosystem. Rats, lice, infection. It wasn't punishment alone, it was erasure. Still, some prisoners survived long enough to leave their mark. You notice carvings higher up the wall, tall, uneven grooves shaped like crosses, circles, tally marks. Some even look like small suns, perhaps a desperate attempt to count the days, or maybe a ritual to remind themselves of light. Historians debate whether prisoners were allowed candles. Most say no, which means every mark here was made in darkness. Imagine that, scraping symbols into unseen stone. Hoping someone one day would find them and understand, you move along the corridor, and suddenly, the ground dips. The stones change color, darker, wetter, cold. Your breath comes out in white clouds now. Ahead, larger space opens up, circular and cavernous. The ceiling arches high above, disappearing into shadow. Chains hang from there, two longer ones, their ends brushing the ground like iron vines. You take a few steps in, your lantern's light catching on a massive metal ring bolted into the center of the floor. Around it, faint outlines, grooves carved into the stone in circular patterns. At first, you think they're ornamental. Then you realize they're worn paths, where chains were dragged again and again over centuries. This was no ordinary cell. This was a holding hall. In the 12th and 13th centuries, many European castles had waiting chambers, like this, a place for prisoners to be restrained before interrogation. The church called it custodia levis, light custody. The phrase was ironic. There was nothing light about it. It simply meant you weren't dead yet. The faintest wind snakes through the room, carrying a low hum. For a heartbeat, it almost sounds like whispering. You pause, tilt your head, listen. Nothing, just air moving through forgotten holes. You turn your focus to one of the chain sets still bolted to the wall. The cuffs are thick, their edges jagged from centuries of corrosion. You crouch beside them and notice something else. A faint indentation below, the shape of two knees pressed into stone. You blink. No, just where you take yourself. But deep down, you know someone knelt here for a very, very long time. A random thought crosses your mind, almost intrusive. You wonder how long it takes for a person to stop struggling, to stop hoping for rescue, to start talking to the walls instead of the guards. There's a strange comfort in that thought. Not joy, not peace, but the understanding that even in despair, humans still speak. Maybe that's why the air feels alive here, because it remembers the sound of people refusing to go quietly. You reach for another chain, thicker this time, heavier, and as it swings slightly, something tiny falls from its loop. A small metal pin about the size of a fingernail. You pick it up, brush the dust off, and realize it's a tooth. Iron blackened, but unmistakably shaped like one. A relic of pain-turned artifact. You whisper, sorry, to no one. The dripping starts again, steady, rhythmic. You can't tell if it's water or something older. Your lantern sputters for a second, and the shadows grow bolder, pooling in corners like liquid night. You think of how prisoners once prayed here, to gods or devils, or maybe just to the absence of both. And as you step back, a peculiar calm settles over you, because for all the horror, there's something sacred in these stones, a kind of truth no history book can translate. You look once more at the chains, their empty loops swaying gently in the dark, as if still waiting for wrists that never returned. And you keep walking deeper, into the next corridor, where the real instruments of confession begin. You follow the curve of the stone corridor until it widens into a small chamber, its ceiling low and arched like the inside of a rib cage. The air here feels thicker somehow, humid, stale, full of old breath that's been waiting centuries for a listener. Your lantern's flame wavers, and you can almost hear it hiss in protest, as if it too knows what's coming next. The rack waits for you at the center of the room. At first, you don't notice it fully. It looks like an oversized carpenter's bench, its wooden frame blackened and cracked. But then your eyes catch the ropes, coarse hemp strands coiled around the rollers on each end, their fibers stiff with age. The crank still sits attached, iron teeth dulled by time, but perfectly functional. Someone, somewhere had once turned that handle until it stopped turning people into themselves. You circle the rack slowly, your boots echo on the floor, and for a strange moment, you're aware of your own limbs, your arms, your shoulders, the quiet miracle of everything staying connected. Medieval torturers understood that too well. They called this device the question. Because it wasn't punishment, it was conversation. The prisoner would be strapped down, wrists bound to one roller, ankles to another. Then slowly, always slowly, the executioner turned the handle. Bones stretched, joints cracked, tendons strained like harp strings pulled out of tune. They said the body could stretch nearly a foot longer before the soul gave up. You pause and glance at the crank. There's something obscene about its simplicity. Just wood, rope, and human ingenuity. That's what makes it worse. You think about how someone once built this, not out of rage, but out of duty. They probably sanded the wood smooth, adjusted the pulleys, maybe even took pride in its symmetry. There's something chilling about the idea of craftsmanship serving cruelty. Scholars still argue whether the rack was as common as legends claim. Some say it was more symbolic, used in only the most public trials. Others believe it was standard procedure in major European inquisitions, from London to Florence. Either way, the imagery stuck. Pain always leaves a longer legacy than mercy. You step closer and notice the faint outline of dark stains beneath the device. Could be oil, could be something else. You decide not to guess too hard. There's a narrow table nearby, half collapsed under its own decay. You brush the dust away and find tools laid out neatly, as if their owner had just stepped away and forgotten to return. Iron pincers, a wooden mallet, and a jagged knife that looks more surgical than violent. You pick it up carefully, its edge long gone dull, and realize what it was used for, to loosen the joints when the rack stopped working. You set it down quickly. Something drips nearby, echoing softly. You turn and see water seeping from the ceiling, trickling down into a crack near the wall. The sound reminds you of a heartbeat, slow and steady. It feels too human. You find yourself whispering, "Who was the last one here?" The question lingers in the air. The walls, as always, refuse to answer. Still, fragments of truth have survived. You remember reading about John Felton, a 17th century Englishman who stabbed the Duke of Buckingham and was questioned on the rack. The account said his silence impressed even his captors. He refused to speak, even as his limbs tore apart. A gruesome fact, sure, but also oddly dignified. Pain doesn't always defeat willpower, sometimes it sharpens it into defiance. You can almost hear it, the creak of wood, the wet pop of joints, the tortured gasps. But you also imagine the silence between each turn of the crank. That unbearable pause when both men, the torturer and the tortured, listen together, waiting to hear what will break first. Your lantern flickers again, casting the rack's shadow across the wall. It stretches grotesquely, longer than it should, ropes twisting into shapes that resemble reaching arms. You blink, but it doesn't go away. It just sways as if the ghost of the machine still works. You try to steady your breathing, but it comes out too loud. You feel a tickle of claustrophobia. The room seems smaller now, closer. You realize this chamber wasn't built to let sound escape, it was built to contain it. Every scream would bounce off the walls and return to the listener, amplified, distorted. The tormentor heard his own cruelty echo back at him. Maybe that's why some of them went mad. Your fingers brush the crank handle, cold, smooth. You hesitate, then give it the gentlest turn. It moves easily, too easily. The rope jerks slightly, then stops. The silence afterward is unbearable. You imagine someone lying there centuries ago, waiting for the same sound. You feel their panic like a residue in the air. You step back, quickly, muttering, sorry again. You've apologized to the dead more times than you can count tonight. The thought hits you then, this device wasn't just a machine, it was a dialogue. One question asked in flesh and answered in agony. The Middle Ages believed truth had to be extracted physically, that words alone weren't proof. Pain was the only language God couldn't ignore. It's almost poetic if you ignore the screaming. There's a low shelf carved into the wall, a storage niche for torches maybe. But in the dust, you notice something odd, a set of small carvings etched carefully into the stone. Circles, overlapping lines, almost like geometric diagrams. At first, they seem decorative, but then you recognize the pattern. It's a medieval symbol for eternity. A prisoner's quiet rebellion, perhaps carving infinity in a place meant to erase it. You crouch to trace it with your finger, and for a moment your hand fits perfectly inside one of the circles. You feel the faint vibration of your own pulse against the stone, like the room is testing if you belong here. You pull back quickly. Your breath catches when the chain behind you gives a sudden metallic rattle. You spin around. Nothing, just the rack, still, silent, waiting. You realize the chill in your spine isn't just fear, it's recognition. Because somewhere deep inside, you understand the rack wasn't only for criminals or heretics. It was for anyone unlucky enough to be inconvenient. Power doesn't need guilt, it only needs silence. You glance one last time at the machine, the ropes like veins, the wood like bone. And as you walk away, the lantern's flame flickers low, casting one final shadow that looks eerily like a man stretching toward freedom. You whisper again, almost there, though you're not sure if you're comforting yourself or him. The corridor ahead is darker, steeper. The next chamber glows faintly in the distance, as if waiting to reveal a new kind of horror, metal shaped like mercy. You take a few steps forward, your boots sinking slightly into the soft layer of dust that's been collecting here for centuries. The air shifts, the faint, coppery scent of rust mingles with something strangely sweet, like old incense. The corridor opens into a wider vault, the kind of room that might have once served as a chapel. The irony doesn't escape you. And there it is, the Iron Maiden. It stands upright in the center of the chamber like a coffin that decided to evolve. Its lid is ajar, just enough for your lantern light to catch the faint shimmer of metal spikes inside. You feel your throat tighten. It's tall, taller than you, maybe 7 feet. The face carved into its front plate looks almost calm, serene even, with closed eyes and a faint smile. You've seen holy statues with less peace than this. You walk in a slow circle around it. The light plays along its curved edges, and you notice something strange. The metal isn't as corroded as you'd expect. Someone, somewhere along the centuries, kept it oiled, maintained. It's unsettling to think of a torturer polishing his tools like a priest polishing relics. Then comes the question every historian asks when standing before one of these: was it ever real? Scholars still argue about that. Some claim the Iron Maiden was a later invention, an 18th or 19th century exaggeration created to romanticize medieval cruelty for museums and penny dreadfuls. Others insist versions of it did exist earlier, combining coffin-like confinement with sharp internal spikes that pierced but didn't kill, at least not quickly. You lean closer and notice something on the inner hinge. A faint engraving, mostly worn away. You trace it with your gloved fingertip and make out the Latin words, Dula est veritas. Pain is truth. You let out a quiet laugh, the kind that sounds too small for the room. Of course it is, you whisper. You can almost imagine the ritual of it, the prisoner led in, prayers muttered by clerics nearby, the crowd pretending this was justice. The Iron Maiden wasn't just punishment, it was performance art in cruelty. A slow closing of faith and fear until the last breath turned into silence. You move around to the back of it and find the locking mechanism, 2 heavy bolts, and a latch shaped like a cross. Someone had an odd sense of symbolism. You picture the handle turning, the heavy door swinging shut, and the spikes sliding inward, a medieval hug from hell. For a moment, you wonder if you could stand inside it, just for scale, but your body reacts before your mind finishes the thought. Every muscle tenses, your heartbeat quickens, you step back sharply, almost bumping into a low stone pedestal behind you. On it sits another object, smaller, but no less disturbing, a metal mask. It's a shame mask, or as the Germans called it, a Schön mask, shaped like a human face but distorted. Exaggerated eyes, a stretched grin, sometimes even animal features. This one has a long tongue of iron hanging from the mouth. You pick it up carefully, the cold weight settling into your palms like guilt itself. People wore these not for pain, but for humiliation. Gossips, blasphemers, thieves, anyone who annoyed authority could be paraded through town with one of these bolted on. Imagine the sound of the crowd, the laughter, jeers. That might have been worse than any spike. You set the mask back down gently, its empty eyes catching the lantern's glow. Something shifts behind you, a faint metallic creak. The Iron Maiden's lid moves slightly, as if nudged by a breath of air. You freeze. The movement is small, barely a few inches, but enough to make the shadows inside shift. For a heartbeat, you could swear you see a figure inside. Just an outline, nothing more. You blink hard. It's gone. The sound echoes for a long time, fading into the vault's curved ceiling. You tell yourself it's just pressure, the metal contracting in the damp air. You're not superstitious, but the way the shadows linger feels intentional, like the room itself wanted to remind you that stories don't need facts to feel true. You remember an account from Nuremberg, written in the late 1500s. An executioner describing a maiden of iron built to embrace the guilty. Whether it was poetic or literal, you're not sure, but the tone was clear. He admired it, not for its function, but for its silence. The maiden never screamed, he wrote. Only the men did. That line stays with you longer than it should. The floor here slopes slightly downward toward a drain in the center. Barely noticeable, but unmistakably designed. You crouch to inspect it, brushing away layers of dust and debris. Underneath, you find fragments of something brittle. Wood, maybe bone. You decide not to think too deeply about it. You stand and let your lantern light wander across the room. There are faint frescoes on the walls, flaking, faded, but still visible. Angels, saints, halos. Their faces have long since peeled away, leaving ghostly outlines staring down at the Iron Maiden like silent witnesses. The irony stings salvation watching over suffering. It's almost funny in a grim way how medieval people could see torture and religion as part of the same conversation. Suffering purified, pain revealed truth, death restored order. You say it quietly, half to yourself. They didn't build monsters, they believed in them. Your voice bounces back from the walls, softer than before. Something about that echo feels final, like this room has told you everything it wants to. You glance one last time at the Iron Maiden, its lid still slightly open. A quiet invitation. You step back toward the doorway, the lantern trembling in your grip. As you leave, a drop of condensation falls from the ceiling, striking the metal surface with a sharp plink. It sounds too much like a heartbeat. You walk faster. The corridor narrows again, the light behind you dimming as if swallowed by the Iron Maiden's shadow. Ahead you see a faint orange glow flickering from another room. Warmer, almost alive. Firelight, and with it a smell that's all too human. Scorched flesh and smoke. The next chamber, you realize, doesn't just imprison pain, it creates it. You step toward the orange glow, each footfall echoing faintly through the stone corridor. The air grows thicker, denser, with the unmistakable scent of burnt oil and metal. There's warmth here too, not just the stale breath of a forgotten dungeon, but the lingering residue of something that once roared. As you enter the next chamber, the flickering light reveals the outline of something massive dominating the center of the room. At first glance, it looks like a statue, a strange, hollow beast crouched on all fours. But as your lantern's beam sweeps over it, the truth settles in your stomach like lead. The brazen bull. A life-sized sculpture of a bull, cast entirely from bronze. Its surface dulled and green with centuries of corrosion. Its expression is strangely serene, its mouth open in a silent bellow. You step closer, tracing the delicate engravings that run along its flanks. Twisting vines, Latin inscriptions and faint hammer marks from the artisans who forged it. The craftsmanship is astonishing, the purpose is horrifying. You circle around it, and your light catches the bull's hollow interior through a small hatch in its side. The inside is black and charred. The stench of old soot still clings to it, even after all this time. You don't need a historian's training to imagine how it worked. The victim was placed inside, the door sealed, and a fire lit beneath the belly. As the metal heated, screams from within echoed through pipes designed to distort the sound, turning human agony into the roar of a raging bull, a grotesque symphony for an audience that once called it justice. You recall the legend. Perillos of Athens, the inventor presenting his creation to Phalaris, the tyrant of Agrigentum. When Perillos boasted about how realistic the screams would sound, Phalaris ordered him to be the first to test it. You wonder if that story is true or just poetic irony invented by later chroniclers. Either way, the idea of a man trapped inside his own invention feels perfectly medieval, symbolism made literal, hubris turned into heat. The longer you stare, the more you notice the strange beauty of the design. The head of the bull is fitted with a complex system of tubes and valves, engineered to channel air and sound. Whoever built it wasn't just a torturer, they were an artist. You run your hand along the cool bronze flank and whisper, "They made pain sing." A faint metallic hum answers you, though it might just be the wind slipping through the cracks. In one corner of the room, a rusted chain dangles from the ceiling, ending in an iron hook. Beneath it lies a scorched pit, half filled with ashes. You kneel and sift through it with the tip of your glove. Tiny bone fragments glint beneath the soot. Too small to be human, you tell yourself. Probably animal remains used in demonstration. Probably. Your lantern catches a shimmer near the far wall, a large iron contraption half buried under a collapsed beam. You clear away debris and recognize it immediately. The breaking wheel. Simple, brutal, efficient. A massive wooden wheel with iron spokes, once mounted horizontally. The condemned would be tied to it, limbs spread across the spokes. The executioner would then use a hammer or iron bar to shatter each bone methodically, arms, legs, ribs, turning the body into a grotesque mosaic of pain. Sometimes death came quickly. Usually it didn't. You find a few rusted iron nails still embedded in the floor nearby, each one bent slightly out of shape. Maybe from the struggles of someone who refused to die quietly. For a moment you just stand there, surrounded by these relics of cruelty. The Iron Maiden, the shame mask, the brazen bull, the breaking wheel, all of them testaments to an era that dressed its horrors in ritual and faith. The Middle Ages weren't dark because of ignorance. They were dark because they understood pain too well, and found meaning in it. You glance upward and notice the vaulted ceiling above. Smoke-stained but still bearing traces of color, murals, faded reds and golds, depict scenes of judgment angels with trumpets, souls weighed on scales, demons dragging the damned. You realize these tortures weren't random acts of sadism. They were reflections, earthly mirrors of divine punishment. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was theology carved in metal and bone. A sound breaks your thoughts. A faint clang from behind. You whirl around. The bull's open hatch swings slightly, creaking on its hinge. Just air movement again, you think. But then you notice something impossible. A thin wisp of smoke curling up from the bull's nostrils. You blink, step closer. The air feels warmer now. The smell of burnt oil grows sharper. You hold up your lantern and for an instant, you could swear the bronze glows faintly red beneath the layer of tarnish, as though heat still lingers deep within. You back away slowly. The legend said the souls of the burned remain trapped in the bull, their cries forever echoing through its pipes. Superstition, surely, but standing here the silence feels thick enough to carry those ghosts. A bead of sweat rolls down your temple. Not from fear, you tell yourself. Just the heat. You turn to leave, your footsteps quick and uneven. As you reach the threshold, something catches your eye, a small plaque fixed to the wall near the exit. The Latin inscription reads, Justitia ardet, justice burns. You almost laugh. Almost. The corridor beyond looks darker than before, your lantern's flame flickering violently as if fighting against some unseen breath. You take one last look at the chamber and whisper, I hope you're finally cold. Then you step into the dark, leaving behind the silent roar of the bull and the faint, lingering echo of fire. You follow the corridor until the air grows damp again, trading the warmth of the last chamber for a cold that seeps right into your skin. The flickering lantern light dances over stone walls slick with condensation, forming long, trembling shadows that look almost alive. Somewhere ahead, water drips, slow, steady, rhythmic, as if keeping time for a ritual no one performs anymore. You pause at a heavy wooden door, its frame rotted but still sturdy, as though reluctant to forget its purpose. Scratched into its surface are faint marks, parallel lines, deep and jagged. They look like tolly marks, too many to count. You run your fingers over them and feel the grooves under your glove. Each one a day, a week, maybe a lifetime. You push the door open. Inside is a narrow chamber, almost completely bare. A drain runs along the floor's center, still faintly damp. In one corner, a tilted wooden board leans against the wall, simple in design, yet unmistakably sinister. Its top end is fitted with iron clamps, the bottom, with leather straps that have long since stiffened. Beside it sits a bucket, dark stains crusted around the rim. You don't need to be told what this was used for. The water torture room. The term sounds almost mild, like something out of a medieval spa menu. But as you step closer, the details fill in the blanks. Prisoners would be tied to that board, angled so their heads hung just low enough to let gravity do its cruel work. Water would be poured continuously over the face, sometimes cold, sometimes filthy, sometimes salted. The body's reflex is to gasp for air, but the lungs fill with water instead, slowly, repeatedly, until panic becomes delirium. Scholars still argue whether this exact form, known later as waterboarding, was a medieval invention or evolved from ancient Roman and Islamic interrogation techniques. The Church, of course, denied its use officially, but inquisitorial manuals from the 13th century speak of baptisms of confession. You smile grimly. It seems faith could always find poetic names for pain. You crouch beside the drain. Its metal grate is rusted through in places, revealing dark water glistening below. The sound of dripping resumes, plop, 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 echoing upward like a heartbeat under the floor. You could swear the rhythm changes slightly when you move. For a second, you picture the room alive again, torches blazing, ropes creaking, muffled screams bouncing off the walls. A friar taking notes in the corner, documenting the progress of a soul's purification. The subject confessed at the third pouring. He might have written, "Praise be to divine mercy." You tilt your head, and the light catches another device hanging on the far wall, a long, coiled rope with a loop at its end, the strappado, another favorite of inquisitors and kings alike. Simple, portable, devastating. You picture it in action, the prisoner's hands tied behind the back, the rope attached to wrists and looped over a ceiling beam. With a single pull, the body lifts into the air, shoulders dislocating in a heartbeat. If the questioner was feeling merciful, he'd let the victim down before fainting. If not, he'd add weights to the ankles and repeat. A chill trickles down your spine as you trace the faint grooves on the ceiling beam, the marks left by countless ropes sawing through the wood. Evidence, silent and unflinching. You step back and notice something curious, faint words carved into the wall just beneath the beam. Most of the letters are eroded, but a few remain legible. Non negavi? I did not deny. For a moment, you don't move. The air feels heavy, as if the very stones resent being disturbed. Then, quietly, the dripping stops. Complete silence. You lift your lantern higher, trying to pierce the shadows. The room feels smaller now, the corners closer. There's a sound, barely audible, like someone inhaling just beside your ear. You whip around. Nothing. Only the tilted board and the empty bucket staring back. You breathe out slowly, reminding yourself this is history, not haunting. Yet the line feels thinner here than anywhere else you've been tonight. Maybe it's the water. Maybe it's the imagination filling in what the centuries erased. A stray thought slips through your mind. People in the Middle Ages believed water had the power to cleanse sin. Maybe that's what made this torture so terrifying. It wasn't punishment, it was purification. A drowning of the spirit before the body gave in. You think of the medieval belief that demons feared holy water. What irony, then, that men used it to extract truth through suffocation. You almost laugh at the contradiction, but the sound catches in your throat. A faint breeze passes through, and for a second, the board shifts just slightly, groaning under its own weight. You glance toward the door, and the flickering lantern light casts your shadow across the wall. Except it's not moving the way you are. You freeze. The shadow tilts its head just a fraction slower than you. Then the light steadies, and it's gone. You exhale shakily, whispering to no one, "Nice trick." Still, you can't quite shake the feeling that the air is watching you. You move toward the doorway, but just before stepping out you glance back at the board one last time. For some reason, the bucket now looks a little fuller than before. The water inside ripples once, though the air around you is perfectly still. "Right," you murmur, voice low. "Time to find some dry ground." As you close the door, the dripping resumes behind it, steady, patient, endless. And somewhere deep in the dark below, you swear you hear a faint splash, like something, or someone, finally taking a breath. You walk on, lantern trembling slightly in your hand as the corridor widens into a new chamber. This one smells of burnt meat and oil, faint but unmistakable. The stone beneath your boots is blackened, uneven, and you realize with a shudder, it isn't shadow, it's soot. Your light reveals a wide, circular pit in the center of the floor. Around it, the stones are cracked from heat. Above, a narrow vent cuts through the ceiling, like a throat that once swallowed smoke. You can almost hear the faint echo of chanting, metal clashing, and the hiss of something hot meeting flesh. Welcome to the chamber of fire and steel. You step closer, the lantern light glinting off objects scattered along the walls. Hooks, chains, iron tongs. Branding irons with symbols at their tips, crosses, crowns, initials, each one custom forged to leave its owner's mark. Justice was personal here. You run your fingers over one of the branding irons, a circular seal etched with a fleur-de-lis, royal insignia, probably used in France during the 14th century. A reminder that punishment wasn't limited to heretics and traitors. Sometimes thieves, deserters, or anyone unlucky enough to cross the wrong noble ended up branded for life. The burn wasn't just pain, it was identity. And identity, in those times, was everything. You picture the scene, the condemned dragged in, stripped, wrists bound, the priest murmuring prayers for the soul while the iron heated in the coals until it glowed orange, red, a single breath's hesitation, then the hiss, the smell, the scream, instant judgment, eternal mark. They called it the judgment of fire. In some cases, the same tools were used for trial by ordeal. You remember reading about it, how suspects were forced to hold a red-hot iron bar, walk 3 steps, and then have their hands bandaged. If the wound healed cleanly after 3 days, they were declared innocent. If it festered, God had spoken otherwise. You smile faintly. Scholars still argue. You murmur to yourself, whether anyone ever really believed God healed burns in 72 hours. But belief wasn't the point, was it? The system worked because people feared it. Fear has always been more reliable than truth. As you pace the chamber, your lantern's glow falls upon a wooden frame at the far end. A kind of table tilted upright, its surface charred and gouged. Chains dangle from both sides. At first, you think it's just another rack, but then you notice the char marks on the headrest, the residue of melted wax, and the faint, bitter scent of oil. This wasn't for stretching. This was for burning. Some accounts called it the Spanish chair. The prisoner would be seated, strapped down with iron bands, and then slow fires lit beneath the metal seat until flesh cooked against it. In other cases, heated plates were pressed against the skin. Measured, deliberate cruelty designed to keep the victim alive as long as possible. A horrifying thought strikes you. Someone had to maintain the tools. Someone had to clean the blood, reheat the irons, replace the ropes. An entire profession built around maintaining agony. Executioners and torturers weren't nameless monsters. They were craftsmen, paid by the crown or the church. Their work had procedure, rhythm, even pride. You imagine one now, standing beside you. A man with soot on his face, sleeves rolled up, wiping his brow after a long day's labor. It's nothing personal, he might say. Just the law. You shake your head and take another step forward. A faint metallic clink makes you freeze. You lower the lantern and see, lying half buried in dust near your boot, a rusted tool shaped like a crescent moon. You pick it up, turning it over in your hand. It takes you a moment to realize what it is. Tongue pullers. Designed to rip out a liar's tongue or a blasphemer's. The shape still fits perfectly between your fingers. You drop it instantly, wiping your palm against your coat, as if the centuries-old rust might still bite. The silence that follows feels heavier than before. Then, slowly, from somewhere near the vent, comes a faint sound, soft, almost melodic, a whistle, rising and falling with the draft. It sounds eerily like breathing. You glance toward the pit, your lantern flickering. For a moment, you could swear the stones are pulsing, glowing faintly as though embers still live beneath the floor. The illusion breaks when a drop of condensation falls from the ceiling and lands with a hiss. Still, the air is warm enough that your breath no longer fogs. You wonder how much of the heat is memory. On the far wall, you find a mural, burned but still visible. Angels on one side, flames on the other. Between them, a figure kneeling, eyes lifted toward heaven, the fire curling around his feet. Above him, the Latin phrase, "Ineen probita fides," faith is tested by fire. You whisper it aloud, the words echo, distorted by the chamber's curve. Some historians debate whether the church sanctioned torture directly or merely turned a blind eye. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the smoke. They didn't need to swing the hammer themselves. They only needed to bless the arm that did. You run a hand over the cracked mural, feeling soot crumble beneath your touch. Fire as purification, you murmur. Steel as confession. The phrase sounds absurd and holy all at once. You step back toward the center, the pit yawning open beneath your feet like the mouth of some sleeping creature. A faint draft blows upward through the vent, carrying with it a scent that doesn't belong here: wood smoke. Fresh. But this place hasn't seen fire for centuries. The lantern flickers violently, and for just a heartbeat you see movement in the corner of your eye, a shape hunched near the pit, as if someone's still tending the flames. You turn sharply, raise the light. Nothing. Only air shimmering faintly with heat that shouldn't exist. You take a slow breath. The warmth fades, leaving only chill stone once more. Maybe that's the curse of places like this. They remember their purpose better than people do. You move toward the exit, lantern trembling. As you reach the doorway, you glance back. The pit looks darker now, endless. You whisper softly, trial by fire past. Then step through, letting the darkness swallow the chamber behind you, taking with it the faint scent of smoke and something else you can't quite name. You emerge into a corridor where the walls no longer feel like dungeons but like memories pressed into stone. The air here is cooler, quieter, almost too quiet. The echo of your footsteps sounds muffled, swallowed by something soft and unseen. The torches that once lined these passages are gone, but faint scorch marks still mark their resting places, like ghostly halos along the walls. You follow the winding path until you reach an arched doorway reinforced with iron bands. Etched into the metal is a faint emblem, a fortress silhouette surrounded by delicate curls of ivy. You know that shape from books and documentaries. You're standing at a reconstructed cell block from the Bastille, the prison that became the symbol of tyranny and the spark of revolution. Except this isn't Paris, and the stones here feel older, rougher, a hybrid of legend and memory, like someone rebuilt a nightmare out of what they imagined it looked like. The hinges groan as you push the heavy door open. The space beyond feels larger than the chambers you've seen before. Narrow cells line both sides of a long hallway, each one sealed by a rusted iron gate. The corridor stretches into darkness, punctuated by faint patches of light from narrow slits high above. You walk forward, lantern raised, eyes drawn to the scratched graffiti on the walls. It's everywhere: names, dates, symbols, fragments of prayers. Some are neat and careful, carved by steady hands, others are wild scratches made in panic or madness. You trace one of them: Je me souviendrai. I will remember. You whisper it aloud, and the words seem to shiver through the air. Another reads simply, Injustice is a mirror. You smile softly at that one. Even in despair, someone had the clarity to see the poetry of it all. You pause by an open cell. Inside, there's nothing but a straw pallet and a small wooden stool. The stool's surface bears dozens of tiny cuts, tick marks, maybe, or letters half finished and abandoned. The ceiling arches low, pressing down on you as if the stones themselves were tired of holding their secrets. A faint breeze drifts through the hallway, carrying with it a strange, almost melodic hum. It takes you a moment to realize it's coming from the walls themselves. The way air squeezes through the cracks and holes left by centuries of settling, it sounds almost like whispers. You close your eyes and listen. It's easy to imagine the prisoners who once sat here in silence, their words and sighs absorbed by the stone. People always talk about ghosts as if they're entities wandering the halls. But what if ghosts are just the walls remembering the sound of human breath? You open your eyes again and take a slow step deeper into the corridor. Scholars still argue whether the Bastille's reputation for horror was earned or exaggerated. Some call it propaganda, others a justified symbol of oppression. But walking through this place, truth and myth blend seamlessly. Whether the stories were real doesn't matter anymore. The suffering left its fingerprint on history. You peer into another cell, slightly larger than the rest. There's an iron ring bolted to the floor, its edges worn smooth. Beside it, the faint outline of something burned into the stone, maybe the shape of a small chest or cot. It's hard to tell. Pinned to the wall, protected behind cracked glass, is a single faded note written in French. You lean in to read, Les mers parlent quand les hommes n'y peuvent pas. The walls speak when men cannot. You whisper it under your breath, and for a moment you swear the air itself answers. Your lantern flickers. From somewhere down the corridor comes a faint metallic tapping, irregular, hesitant, almost like Morse code. You turn your head, trying to locate the source, but it echoes from everywhere at once. The rhythm is oddly familiar: 3 short taps, 2 long, 1 short. You strain to listen. It repeats. You hesitate, then tap your knuckles lightly against the nearest wall, mimicking the pattern. The echo carries, and for a few seconds there's silence. Then, reply. The same rhythm. You freeze, half smiling in disbelief. Maybe some loose chain swinging, maybe air pressure. But still, you knock again, this time slower. The sound bounces, fades, and dies. No response. You wait a little longer, then exhale and laugh quietly to yourself. Okay, you win. I'm officially creeped out. You walk farther down until you reach the end of the hall. Here, the air feels colder, heavier. On the final cell door hangs a corroded plaque. Prisoner in corner. Unknown prisoner. You open it carefully. Inside, the cell is completely empty. No bed, no stool, not even straw. Just a dark mark on the floor where something heavy once sat. The silence here is absolute. Not even the wind breathes. You set your lantern down for a moment and let your eyes adjust to the gloom. The darkness feels alive, thick enough to press against your chest. Then, faintly, you hear something new, a whisper. Not words exactly, but the suggestion of them. The tone is low, calm, almost soothing, like someone reciting a prayer in another language. You turn your head, trying to pinpoint it. It's not coming from the cell, it's inside the wall. Your throat tightens. You lean in close, ear nearly touching the stone. The sound fades, replaced by your own breathing, louder now, faster. You pull back quickly. Enough. You grab your lantern, its light trembling across the floor, and step back into the corridor. For a moment, you think you see movement in the farthest cell, a shadow passing across the faint beam of light from above. But when you blink, it's gone. You walk quickly now, trying not to run. The whispers seem to follow, growing softer with each step until they dissolve completely. When you finally reach the exit door, you turn back one last time. The corridor stands empty, perfectly still. But carved into the stone near the archway, illuminated just by the last flicker of your lantern, is a new line you swear wasn't there before. We are still remembering. You stare at it for a long time, then blow out your light. In the darkness, the silence hums. The next corridor feels different. Gone are the cramped, crumbling tunnels and the faint whispers of nameless prisoners. Here, the air smells faintly of wax and velvet, an odd contrast after so much damp decay. The stones are smoother, the walls wider, and your lantern light gleams on bronze fixtures that have somehow survived the centuries. This was no dungeon for peasants. You've stepped into the royal cells, the kind reserved for political prisoners, nobles, and anyone unfortunate enough to become an inconvenience to the crown. A faint echo of grandeur lingers here, as though even punishment had to maintain a certain level of dignity. The doors are solid oak, bound with engraved brass instead of rusting iron. One of them still bears a crest, a lion with a broken crown. You pause, tracing it with your fingers, wondering if the man imprisoned here once wore that same symbol on his chest. You open the door gently. The hinges moan, but the sound is more tired than angry. Inside, the chamber surprises you. There's furniture, a table, a chair, even a narrow bed frame. The straw mattress has long since rotted away, but the outline of comfort remains. You spot the remains of a chessboard carved directly into the table's surface, its squares worn smooth by restless hands. Someone here had time. Too much time. You walk around the small room, the floor creaking faintly under your boots. The walls are lined with inscriptions again, but these are neater, more deliberate. They read like letters rather than cries. You squint to read one near the bed. They said I was too dangerous to silence in daylight. The handwriting is elegant, deliberate. You can almost imagine the prisoner pausing between each word, pressing the nail or knife tip carefully against the stone, crafting his legacy one letter at a time. Scholars still argue whether medieval royal prisoners were truly mistreated or simply forgotten in comfort. The truth depends on your definition of mercy. You sit in the chair and look around, imagining the scene centuries ago. The guard standing by the door, expression blank. The prisoner staring at the window slit, tracing the shifting square of sunlight on the floor. Day after day, month after month, year after year, you notice a faded mark on the wall near the door, a series of vertical lines grouped in 5. Tally marks again, you count them slowly. 137 sets, nearly 700 days. 2 years, give or take. You exhale, and then you spot something else. A parchment fragment tucked into a crack near the floor. You crouch down, using your knife to pry it loose. It's brittle, discolored, but a few words remain legible. To be caged by silence is worse than to burn. It's unsigned, but you can almost hear the voice behind it. Weary, bitter regal. Maybe a nobleman stripped of title. Maybe a poet whose words offended the wrong lord. Maybe both. You tuck the parchment gently back into its hiding place. Some things are better left where they belong. As you stand, a faint vibration trembles through the floor. It's subtle, like footsteps far below. You glance toward the door, listening. The sound fades. You step out into the corridor again, and your lantern reveals a line of other doors stretching ahead, each one unique, some engraved, some plain. Each one hiding a story. The next cell door is already open. You hesitate before entering. Inside lies a single wooden stool and a pile of what looks like rags. When you kneel to examine them, you realize they were once fine garments, silk embroidered with gold thread, now reduced to ash-colored tatters. Among the fabric lies a rusted pendant, shaped like a sunburst. You lift it, and a small clink echoes as something inside the pendant shifts. It's hollow. You pry it open carefully. Inside rests a curled scrap of parchment with a single Latin phrase. Non omnis moria, I shall not wholly die. You say it softly. The echo repeats it back to you. Or maybe it's just the way sound travels through the corridor. Your mind drifts to the Tower of London, to the stories of princes locked away by their own kin, of Anne Boleyn staring out her window for the last time. Royalty has always had a talent for eating itself. The walls around you seem to hum with those same echoes of betrayal. You continue deeper, passing cell after cell. Some are empty, some are not. One door stands ajar, revealing a skeleton of a desk still holding an ink bottle tipped on its side. The ink has long dried, but the dark stain trails down like frozen tears. You can't help but imagine a final letter, words that never reached the outside world, carried away instead by time and dust. You think about how power must have felt in these walls, the strange cruelty of privilege even in punishment. Better meals, warmer beds, but the same invisible cage. You whisper, even kings have ceilings. As if in response, a faint creak echoes overhead. You tilt your lantern upward, but the ceiling remains still. The sound, however, continues, rhythmic, deliberate. Footsteps. No, it's softer, almost like someone pacing in thought. You move toward the last door at the corridor's end. It's different from the others, smaller, reinforced twice over. A plaque above the arch reads simply, Frowns Betrayer. You hesitate, hand on the latch. Curiosity wins, as it always does. The room inside is bare except for a single iron chair bolted to the floor. On the back wall, carved deep into the stone, are two words, still loyal. You stare at them, the irony sharp enough to taste. The silence here isn't the same as in the other cells. It feels deliberate, heavy with something unsaid. You take a deep breath and whisper to the room, you can stop keeping secrets now. For a heartbeat, the air holds still. Then a faint clang echoes, the sound of a chain brushing against metal, though nothing moves. You turn toward the doorway, and for just a second, you swear you see a flicker of light, not from your lantern, but from within the room itself. A brief, soft shimmer, like a candle greeting you, or maybe warning you. You back away slowly, bowing your head slightly, as if acknowledging someone unseen. Still loyal, you murmur once more, before stepping out and closing the door behind you. The latch clicks shut, gentle as a sigh. The deeper you go, the more the castle's architecture seems to turn against you. The hallways twist tighter, the air grows cold, and the stone feels damp enough to almost sweat. You lower your lantern as you step down another uneven staircase. Each step echoes like a heartbeat, your heartbeat, though it's hard to tell whether it's inside your chest or in the walls themselves. At the bottom, the passage opens into what looks like an underground infirmary, or what once pretended to be one. Tables line the walls, crude and uneven. Hooks dangle from the ceiling, not for torture this time, but for anatomy lessons. You can tell from the faint outlines of instruments long gone, their rust stains still marking where they once lay. You walk past a row of wooden slabs that were once beds. Their surfaces are scored with countless knife marks. Someone, or something, was studied here over and over again. A few surviving objects sit on a shelf, a glass vial sealed with wax, a bone saw missing its handle, and a scrap of parchment covered in hastily scrawled Latin. You bring it close to your lantern light. It reads, To understand pain is to rule it. You smile grimly. Someone in this castle had taken medical science a little too literally. Scholars still argue whether the first medieval surgeons were healers or butchers. In truth, they were often both. The same men who studied infection also served as interrogators. After all, who better to make someone scream without killing them too quickly? You walk slowly between the slabs, imagining the soundscape centuries ago. The drip of water from the ceiling, the rasp of a saw, the muffled pleas that would eventually fade into silence. There's a strange calm here now. The kind of calm that only follows years of horror. You can almost sense the room exhaling after centuries of holding its breath. Then, you see it. A large circular drain in the center of the floor. It's rimmed with iron, still blackened with something you hope was only rust. You crouch beside it, shining your light down the narrow tunnel below. The reflection dances across something metallic. A shiver runs up your spine. The air from below smells different, not decay exactly, but old iron and salt. A familiar scent if you've ever cut your hand and tasted the metallic tang of blood. You stand up quickly and back away, your boots scraping against the floor. The sound echoes oddly, like it's being answered from below. You pause. Listen. 3 beats of silence. Then tap, tap, tap. Your lantern flickers. You hold it steady, telling yourself it's only air movement, a shift in pressure. Old tunnels breathe too, you remind yourself. Still the taps continue, faint but deliberate, matching your own heartbeat. You move toward the far wall, trying to distract yourself. There's a series of wooden cabinets there, their doors warped but mostly intact. You pull one open and find a collection of small bottles, some still corked. The labels are faded, but you can make out words like laudanum, arsenicum, and belladonna, poison and painkillers, 2 sides of the same medieval coin. One bottle, however, is newer. You pick it up and squint. The glass is clearer, smoother, not handmade like the rest. The label is gone, but inside swirls a faint residue that glows when your lantern light hits it just right. You hesitate. Someone's been here, not centuries ago, but recently. A cold draft brushes the back of your neck. You turn sharply, expecting to see another doorway, but there's only the same empty room. The hooks on the ceiling sway slightly, though you swear you felt no breeze. Your pulse quickens. You force a laugh under your breath. Relax, you mutter. Probably just air currents, definitely not ghosts of dissection, happy monks. Still, your hand trembles slightly as you lower the bottle back onto the shelf. You look around once more. In one corner, the wall bears a faint engraving, a circle with intersecting lines, a kind of sigil or alchemical symbol. You trace it with your fingers. Beneath the lines, a faint Latin inscription reads Corpus apparit animam. The body opens the soul. You exhale, sure, and I bet the soul didn't enjoy it much. You murmur, the words bring to mind one of the most famous torture devices in medieval medicine, the tortura del confession, or confession chair. It was said to be a hybrid between surgery and faith, where victims were examined until they repented. Some versions even had heated iron plates beneath them, meant to purify through agony. It's a grim irony, pain as a form of enlightenment. You imagine the physician-priests who might have worked here, their faces half lit by candlelight, quoting scripture while tightening straps. For your salvation, they'd whisper. You step closer to another table and notice something unusual. A small metal box embedded into the side of the wall, sealed with a latch. You tug it open and find a roll of parchment inside, preserved almost perfectly in the dry stone. It reads like notes, anatomical sketches, written observations, and one line underlined twice. He did not die from the wounds, but from the silence. The handwriting is neat, almost obsessive. You imagine a scholar in his robe, quill scratching feverishly, caught somewhere between curiosity and cruelty. You sigh softly. You people really didn't know when to stop, huh? As you place the scroll back, the tapping starts again. Louder now, not from below this time, from the wall behind you. Tap, tap, tap. Then, 3 slower knocks. Your mouth goes dry. Okay, you whisper, either someone's remodeling or I'm about to make friends with a ghostly physician. You hold your lantern up. The flame steadies. The sound stops. Silence again, heavy, thick, like a held breath. You glance at the far wall and spot a thin crack running down from the ceiling. You step closer, pressing your ear against the stone. Nothing. But as you pull away, the faintest sound slips through, a whisper, just one word, carried on the cold air, stay. You blink, step back. Yeah, that's gonna be a hard pass. You force a nervous laugh and start backing toward the stairs. Your boots scrape, echoing sharply, covering whatever else the darkness might be trying to say. As you climb, your lantern light catches the Latin inscription once more. You look back one last time. The words seem clearer now, as though freshly carved corpus apparit animam. Maybe it always looked that way. Or maybe something down there just wanted to make sure you remembered it. You emerge from the stairwell into a corridor so narrow that the walls almost touch your shoulders. The air changes immediately, drier, thinner, and strangely still. For the first time since you entered this place, you feel the quiet not as peace, but as something watchful. Your lantern light flickers against the walls, revealing small slits, not doors, not windows, observation holes. Someone used to watch from behind them. You run your fingers across one, feeling the faint scrape marks around its edges. From this side, they look like claw marks. From the other, probably curiosity. You take a slow breath and move forward. The passage slopes downward again, spiraling like the throat of something ancient. The stones here are smoother, deliberately cut. This wasn't meant for storage or housing. This was a chamber for performance, for spectacle. You reach the bottom, and your lantern spills light into a circular space. The floor dips inward, forming a pit lined with iron rings and chains. Around the edges stand rows of stone benches carved directly into the walls, tiered like a miniature amphitheater. It's an observation arena, not for sport, not for judgment, for demonstration. Your throat goes dry. You step closer to the edge of the pit, careful not to slip on the thin layer of ash and dust. The remains of something wooden, maybe a chair, maybe a frame, lie twisted in the center. Above it hangs a rusted mechanism with hooks and pulleys. A faint, almost sweet scent lingers in the air, the ghost of burned resin. You realize what it must be: the remains of pitch and tar, used centuries ago to keep torches burning for hours. The light was meant to last, so the audience wouldn't miss a thing. You swallow. Scholars still argue whether the medieval Inquisition's public punishments were about morality or control. In the end, both served the same purposey spectacle. The crowd always came for one reason: to watch fear become entertainment. You imagine it. Torches flickering against the stone, faces hidden behind hoods or veils, and at the center, one poor soul tied to a post, their cries bouncing off the walls. Every sound, every breath amplified for effect. You take a slow step into the pit, the dust rising in soft clouds. The ground feels uneven underfoot. You kneel and brush the dirt aside, revealing a dark stain that never truly faded. Of course, you whisper. Why would it? You stand and look up. Above the pit, there's a grated opening, small, but large enough for a few heads to peer through. Maybe royals or clergy watched from there, safe from the smell, still hungry for control disguised as righteousness. The irony isn't lost on you. Even pain, in its most private form, was a performance. You circle the pit's edge, your lantern light tracing the shapes of the benches. On one seat, someone carved a series of small crosses, maybe tally marks, maybe prayers. Another bench bears a phrase you can barely read through the grime: "Et vidi quod non erat finis terroris." I saw that there was no end to terror. You whisper the words aloud, and your voice seems to hang unnaturally long in the air. The acoustics here are perfect, designed even. You realize something chilling. This room wasn't just for pain. It was also for training. This was where inquisitors learned their craft. You find more inscriptions, some numbers, a few dates, and what might be initials. One spot catches your eye. A symbol shaped like an open eye surrounded by thorns. You recognize it vaguely from medieval texts. It represented the all-seeing church, a short-lived sect obsessed with rooting out sin through illumination. The irony again: light used as a weapon. You step toward the far wall where a large wooden door stands half broken. It leads into another smaller room, darker than the pit itself. Inside are shelves stacked with fragments of tools. Metal, leather, wood. Some so degraded you can't even tell their purpose. Others unfortunately familiar: iron pincers, branding irons, hooks. But one piece stands out, an iron mask shaped like a human face, its mouth locked in an eternal scream. The inner surface is lined with fine needles, dull with age but unmistakably real. You lift it slightly. It's heavy, much heavier than you expect. They called this mercy? You mutter, setting it down carefully. There's a document nailed to the beam nearby, half eaten by time. The ink has faded to brown, but you can make out the heading: for silence and obedience. Beneath it, a note: to wear is to learn humility. You shake your head.
Yeah, humility.
That's one word for it. As you walk back toward the pit, a small glint catches your eye near the center, something metallic beneath the ash. You kneel again, brushing it away with your fingers. It's a ring. Plain, silver, and still faintly polished, as if it resisted the centuries. Inside the band, there's an inscription so small you almost miss it. She will remember. You roll it between your fingers. I bet she did. As you stand, a faint creak sounds above, from the grated ceiling. You glance up, lantern held high. A breeze sweeps through the opening, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and oil. And then a whisper, not words this time, just a sigh, long, low, and unmistakably human. You freeze. The sound seems to travel in circles, bouncing from wall to wall until you can't tell where it started. You mutter, "All right, that's enough history for tonight." But the pit disagrees. Your lantern light flickers violently, then steadies. But the air feels different now, thicker, like the room itself is leaning closer. Listening, you turn toward the exit, walking faster now. Your footsteps echo sharply, each one answered by a second sound, delayed, but matching. As you reach the corridor again, you stop and look back. For a split second, you could swear the pit isn't empty anymore. Something, or someone, stands at the center, just outside the edge of your lantern light, still, watching. You blink, and it's gone. Just darkness again. You close the door gently behind you and whisper under your breath, spectacles over, but the whisper that answers sounds almost amused. You climb the narrow steps away from the pit, your pulse still thudding in your ears. The air above feels slightly warmer, almost as if the castle itself is exhaling after that little performance. You stop halfway up, resting one hand against the wall, trying to slow your breathing. The stone feels faintly warm beneath your palm. That's new. You frown, moving your hand away. Maybe it's your imagination, or maybe the torches once burned so long and so hot that even the walls learned to keep their heat. You reach the top of the stairs and find yourself in a small antechamber. The ceiling is low, the air dry. For the first time, you see traces of sunlight filtering through a slit high in the wall. It paints a thin, dusty beam across the floor, your first real proof that the outside world still exists. You move toward it slowly. The shaft of light lands directly on a wooden table covered in scraps of parchment, quills, and cracked pots of ink. A scribe's station, maybe, or an inquisitor's record room. You brush away the dust, uncovering faint words written in a flowing medieval script. To write is to absolve the self of sin. You smirk softly. Sure. Unless you're the one writing the confessions for other people. The idea makes you shiver. Somewhere in this very room, monks or clerks might have sat, dutifully transcribing screams into neat Latin phrases. He repented. She confessed. The soul was purified. Every horror reduced to a sentence. Every death made holy with a pen. You pick up a page that's still mostly intact. The ink has faded, but a few words are legible. Testis unus sufficit. One witness is enough. Your stomach knots. That phrase meant something very specific in medieval law. It meant that if one person said you were guilty, it was often enough to condemn you. No trial, no defense, just accusation, judgment, and sentence. Scholars still argue whether medieval justice was truly blind or simply indifferent. You move along the wall, past shelves that have mostly collapsed. Amid the debris, you spot something gleaming faintly. An inkwell, still sealed with wax. When you pop it open, the smell that escapes isn't ink at all. It's sharp and metallic. Blood. You snap the lid shut immediately. Right, you whisper, definitely not calligraphy. A faint flutter of paper catches your attention. You turn to see a single sheet dislodged from the shelf, drifting toward the ground. You kneel and pick it up carefully. It's torn from a ledger, rows and rows of names, each followed by a simple mark. Most are crosses, a few are circles, and next to one name scrawled in red is the word, unbroken. You stare at it for a long time. The ink looks darker than the rest, fresher. You fold the paper and tuck it into your pocket before you can second guess yourself. The corridor ahead beckons again, this one broader, lined with high arches and narrow windows that look out onto nothing but darkness. You can almost hear the faint murmur of wind pushing through the slits, a ghostly sigh that fills the silence. Your footsteps echo unevenly now, the rhythm thrown off by the loose stones beneath your boots. Every few meters, you spot more parchments nailed to the walls. Official decrees, fragments of sermons, orders for imprisonment. Each one ends with the same signature, in nomine lucis. In the name of light. You whisper the phrase under your breath, then chuckle quietly. Funny how much darkness hides behind that word. As you walk, the smell changes again. Less of mold, more of burnt tallow and incense. A chapel, perhaps. Or what's left of one. The corridor opens into a small circular room. The remains of an altar stand at its center, its marble cracked and stained. Behind it, a painted fresco still clings to the wall, a depiction of angels driving demons into a pit. But time has played its own tricks on it. The paint has flaked away in strange places, turning the angels' faces pale and hollow, the demons' shapes blurred into something almost human. You step closer, holding up your lantern. On the altar rests a rusted chalice. You lean in and see that it's half filled with what looks like candle wax, but the surface bears shallow scratches. Letters. You tilt it to read. Lux in tenebris, light in darkness. You smile faintly. How poetic, and how ironic. You place the chalice back gently and glance around the chapel. Wooden benches line the sides, all carved with names, initials, prayers. But one carving stands out. 3 words cut deep into the wood of the front pew. Willie watched him burn. You freeze. The letters are crude, almost childlike, but the meaning is anything but. You step back, your breath suddenly sharp in your throat. Guess confession wasn't the only ritual here, you murmur. A flicker of motion draws your eye upward. The fresco above the altar changed. Or maybe it's just your mind playing tricks again. One of the angels seems to have turned slightly, its hollow eyes catching the lantern light just enough to look alive. You blink. The image holds still again. Yeah. That's enough art appreciation for one night. You turn to leave, but your boot catches something, an object wedged under the front pew. You crouch down and pull it free. It's a small, round medallion made of copper, tarnished almost black. The design is simple, a sun with a line striking through it. You flip it over and read the inscription on the back. No light without witness. Your chest tightens. You've seen that phrase before, scratched into a cell wall, half erased by age. Whoever built this castle, or cursed it, wanted everything to be seen. You stand there for a moment, the medallion warm in your hand despite the chill. Then, faintly, from the back of the chapel, you hear a single creak, like a door slowly opening on its own. You turn. The lantern light barely reaches that far, but you see a shape, a darker shadow among shadows. The door swings wider. Something moves inside the blackness. You hold the medallion up instinctively. Though you have no idea why, the air stirs. The flame in your lantern bends toward the doorway as if drawn to it. Then, the whisper returns. Not harsh, not menacing, just calm, almost weary. Witness. You blink. No thanks, you whisper. Already seen plenty, but the whisper answers, a little louder this time. Closer. Witness. You step backward, nearly tripping on the edge of a pew. The flame flickers wildly now, shadows leaping across the fresco. For one dizzying moment, every angel's face seems to turn toward you. Then silence. You steady your breathing. One step back. Another. The medallion in your hand grows cold again. The door closes by itself, wood groaning as it seals shut. You whisper into the emptiness, "All right." Message received. And as you turn to leave, you notice one final detail carved into the altar's base. Words almost lost to time. To see is to remember. To remember is to serve. You pause. Let that sink in. Then whisper softly, almost kindly. "I'll remember. But I'm not serving anyone." You walk away, the chapel fading behind you, its whispers dying with the last flicker of your lantern light. You climb one last staircase, narrower, older, almost completely devoured by the centuries. The air grows fresher with every step, carrying hints of grass, dew, and something you haven't smelled in what feels like forever, the world above. When you finally push open the final hatch, the night greets you like an old friend. The stars hang low, hazy and forgiving, while the moon spills pale silver across the broken courtyard. You step out slowly, the cool wind wrapping around you, whispering against your ear as if to say, "You made it." For a long moment you just stand there, lantern dangling from your hand, letting your heartbeat find its rhythm again. Down below, the castle breathes quietly, its stones still holding every scream, every prayer, every secret it's ever been fed. You know you should leave, yet some small, guilty part of you feels like you're abandoning someone. The loyal ones, the silenced ones, the ones who whispered, "Witness." You take one last look back at the ruin's dark mouth, that ancient staircase leading down to everything you've seen and everything you didn't. You whisper softly, "Rest easy, old ghosts. The story's out now." The night wind stirs the grass, almost like a sigh of relief. You start walking toward the tree line. Every step feels lighter, every breath easier. The air smells of moss and rain and faraway smoke from someone's chimney. Civilization, life, still exists. And maybe, just maybe, you'll sleep tonight. You smile faintly at that thought, glancing over your shoulder once more. The castle looks smaller now, almost peaceful under the moonlight. From this distance, no one would ever guess what it hides. Maybe that's the way history works. It buries the screams, polishes the ruins, and calls them beautiful. As the crickets start their song and the night wraps around you like a blanket, you whisper one last thing, not to the audience, not to the castle, but to yourself. You witnessed enough for one night. Then you take a deep breath, close your eyes for a second, and let the darkness feel safe again. The lantern finally goes out with a soft click.